Well, hello and welcome. Thanks for joining this weekly panel conversation. We've got a great conversation that we're going to have today with three leaders in local law enforcement. My name is Matt Fulton, and I'm the Vice President for National Engagement for a company called Polco. We work with communities around engagement and helping to build performance. But the intent of these conversations is really to get the perspectives of people who are providing leadership in law enforcement agencies across the country, and just how they're involving the community in understanding what the issues are that are driving matters in their community and managing those expectations, and then just kind of getting a better understanding as to what are the issues that are impacting on their departments. The whole intent of the conversations is to try to provide you with a new perspective, a new idea, something that you can take into your own environments and benefit from in the work that you do. So let me move on to the next question. Here's how to the next issue. Here's how the agenda is going to work today. I'll do a quick panel introduction of our three panelists, and then we will, after queuing up the issue a little bit, I will get into asking the questions of the panelists, and then we'll just see if there's any opportunity for issues or questions that the panelists have between themselves, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. The sessions generally take about an hour. But I hope that you'll find that they are helpful for the work that you're doing in your communities. So let me do this. Let me introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is Bob Nevarez, who's been the Delano police chief since the middle of 2018. Before he became chief in Delano, he served for 32 years in the Fresno Police Department. 15 of those years were at the rank of the deputy chief. When he was in Fresno, Bob oversaw the patrol division. It's a huge department, and over, I think, 800 sworn officers are in the department. Later, he oversaw the newly formed Professional Standards Division, and then during the latter part of his time in Fresno, he ran the Administrative Services Division. He's been responsible for all sorts of really critical matters, including internal affairs and officer-involved shootings and things that just really impact local police departments. He's been the department disciplinarian, doing a lot of mitigation hearings around discipline and pre-discipline. And as the administrative division commander, Bob represented the department during all of the litigations that were impacting the community. It's also nice to note that Bob has done a lot of work at the college level, teaching at various institutions on law enforcement related topics. Bob, thanks for being here. And I would love it if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit more about yourself.
Well, thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. Well, currently I'm at the Delano Police Department, where I've been for almost 3 years. And as we were talking about earlier, the transition to that agency has been very natural. When I worked in Fresno, I kind of prided myself on always working areas that were a little more challenging, areas with a lot of population, people of color, a lot of big Hispanic population. And Delano's is very similar. The same types of challenges, gang violence, large Hispanic population. The only difference between Fresno and Delano is that in Delano, my Hispanic residents, many of them don't speak Spanish. So my Hispanic roots, my history as English being my second language, has been very helpful. And it's been a pretty seamless transition to the chief of police role in the city of Delano, and I'm loving it.
Well, that's great to hear. Bob, thanks a lot for being part of the panel conversation today. I'm happy to introduce Police Chief Larry Gonzalez. Larry is a 28-year veteran of the Riverside Police Department. He joined the department way back in 1993 and has been chief since 2020. But during his tenure, he's had the opportunity to work in essentially every aspect of the department and has provided leadership during some really critical times when departmental training and oversight was really essential. Chief Gonzalez is responsible for a very large department. He's got over 400 sworn police officers. And Larry, one of the things I really was impressed by was all of the instruction that you're doing for such a long time in helping to teach folks on a variety of law enforcement related topics. So congratulations on that. He's a recognized leader in the profession and is considered a subject matter expert in police use of force. Larry's a graduate of the FBI Academy and the Senior Management Institute. Larry, that's a great resume, and I would love it if you would share a little bit more about yourself.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it, Matt, and it's an honor to be on this panel with all of you. Been here my whole career. This is the only agency I've been with, and And side note, I'm the first inside chief in about 30 years. We've always had outside chiefs, which, where the department was when we were looking for chiefs, it was probably the right thing to do at the time because we were in a little bit of turmoil, or there needed to be a change. So very thankful for my predecessor leaving this place in good shape to where I could I could take over, and it was, like I said, and it was pretty much seamless. One of the things, when you have to go through a national recruitment, they still have to open it up, and you've had to do that probably as a city manager, make sure, hey, we're going to open up this recruitment. And I said one of the biggest things I did have going for me is basically growing up in Riverside my whole time and being here for 28 years. And the thing I had going against me is I've been here for 28 years, so it's good and bad, but I've been able to use that to my advantage to kind of guide through. Like I said, I actually took over in 2019 as the interim, and then got the job in January of 2020, and then 2020 happened. So I bring up the inside chief thing because I'll be the first to tell you the chief of police isn't always the smartest guy in the department, but I use every ounce of 28 years of experience from this city to get through each day. So with that, thank you.
Yeah. Larry, I have to imagine that the tenure that you've had, and just as a resident of the community, particularly when you run into a crisis like 2020, really came to your advantage. And that historical perspective of the community probably really worked to your benefit as chief of the department.
Absolutely.
Let me introduce Michelle Palladini. I'm really happy that Michelle is able to join our conversation today. Michelle is a sergeant with the Norfolk Police Department in Massachusetts, and she's been in law enforcement for about 20 years and is widely respected for her law enforcement expertise and commitment to and care and protection of children. And even more, excuse me, for her relenting positive attitudes, passion, and dedication to community. One of the things that really impressed me, Michelle, when I was learning about your background, was the LEAP program that you developed. LEAP stands for Leadership, Empowerment, Assessment, and Protection, which offers a solution-focused method for making meaningful connections between the police and the community. What a great program, and I'm hoping that we'll learn a little bit more about that today. Michelle's been widely recognized for that work and her work, and is a leading voice nationally around the important topics and connections of law enforcement leadership, school-based policing, community policing, and social and emotional health. Michelle, it's really nice to have you on the panel, and would love to hear a little bit more about your background.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here with the rest of the panel as well. My career started with really looking at ways that we could truly protect and serve. And as my career progressed, I think I got into that mindset that I was, coming into work every day and, was getting a little bit jaded about the things that were happening. And for me, it was really a time of self-reflection and the ability to kind of step into greater work by being more self-aware of the attitude I was bringing to the workplace. And a lot of that came with maturity, experience on the job. And so now in a leadership position and in a training capacity where I train and network with officers across the country, it's really kind of this unique ability to take the best parts of what everybody's doing and kind of conceptualize that and bring that not only to my own community, but to the communities that I assist and consult with, and building these strong relationships with our schools, with parents, and with the kind of diverse communities that we work with. And that's really reflective of how we protect and serve, and how we as officers can show up authentically and provide that meaningful service to our communities. So it's I'm in the place where I'm loving the job, and we're in challenging times right now, but we have to have that positive attitude while also recognizing that we have work to do and we have hard days, but we can get through it, and we can continue kind of with that kind of mindset training and that health and wellness. It's all kind of wrapped up into being able to serve authentically. So I'm thrilled to talk a little bit more about that today.
You know what? I think that's great. And I think that all of you have kind of introduced some of the main points that I'm going to use for introducing this topic. Thanks for being here to all of you. The topic today is putting police needs and expectations into a community context. As a city manager of over 3 decades, I have always thought that public safety is probably the most important service that a community can provide, and the role that law enforcement plays in building strong communities and vibrant communities, and just kind of creating places where people want to invest in, you play such an important role in accomplishing those really kind of broad global goals. And the expectations are high for how law enforcement is going to be delivered. Your expectations on how you deliver services, how you're treating residents, your ability to be successful. And you need to be successful because, as you all probably appreciate, if you make a mistake, and you're seeing it around the country right now, the implications are generational, and you have just huge impacts on a community's ability to succeed going forward. And so you're challenged every day with these overlapping and nonstop kind of events, and all of them have, in part, have a responsibility of being attentive to the needs of the people who reside in the community and who have invested in the community. And so this conversation, I think, is really important. We have done a lot of research on this topic. We have a tool that's called the National Police Services Survey. And the intent behind the survey is actually to understand what the residents feel about local policing in their communities. It's been built up with our research arm, National Research Center, that's been doing this kind of work for over 25 years. And we just recently did 2 national panels that focused on, in 2018 and 2020, just focusing in on what residents' perspectives are on local policing. And this chart actually shows the shifts in priorities that residents have between those 2 years. Now, a lot has happened over the last couple of years. And you can see that overall, there has been some shift in the different levels, but the overall ranking has probably stayed pretty similar, except for 2 areas. And those areas are increasing connections with the community and increasing resident accessibility to police. So the work and the background and introductory material that you have shared feeds right into those areas that have actually increased over the past 2 years and have become much more important, just in terms of the way that residents are wanting to engage more with their police departments and help to do some collective problem solving with the department. And so your perspectives that we're going to be listening to today are just going to be really helpful in getting a better understanding about how you engage your public and what role they play in the delivery of law enforcement in your community. So there's 3 questions I want to ask each of you. The first question is, what role should the community play in guiding or influencing the delivery of local police services? The second is, what strategies do you use for managing those expectations? And then finally, what tools and methods are you using to actually get that resident perspective and resident expectations regarding the local police services? And so let's just go ahead and jump into those conversations. And I would love to start with you, Bob, and have you answer the first question, if you wouldn't mind. Can you share with us what role the community is playing in guiding and influencing the delivery of police services in Delano?
Well, that's a really good question, Matt. I'm going to start with a basic premise that, what role should the community play? Well, the community should play the role of determining and guiding the delivery of police services. Somebody years ago told me that we only police a community with their consent. And I remember hearing that and thinking, well, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. I was a lot younger back then. I didn't get it. And then Rodney King happened. And we saw Los Angeles burn to the ground, right? Or segments of it. And I saw firsthand that when the community decides that they don't want your services the way they're being delivered, they're going to tell you. And unfortunately, sometimes it's with a lot of resentment. And we've seen that over the years more recently, and we're going through it now in several communities across the country. So they have the role of determining how we police them, and we only do it with their permission. And that's why, and I'm going to veer off just a little bit, that's why it's so important that when you're in a community that's got lots of crime, like Fresno, like Delano, for a fact that there's going to be a need based on violence to police that community. And so knowing that, it's critically important that as time is playing out, that you're making deposits into that emotional bank account that you referenced earlier, because you're only going to be able to police them with their permission. And if the style that you're using is too aggressive, you're going to hear about that. But I get it now as a chief. I didn't quite get it when I was an officer and a sergeant, but it's a truth. And we're seeing the negative results when a department doesn't do an adequate job of building up that trust when they need it.
Yeah, Bob, do you use, we'll get into this in the third question, but do you use a lot of neighborhood policing for the work that you do for building that emotional bank account?
Absolutely. It's from the minute I got here, it started obviously in my career in Fresno, and this is not new. Anybody that's in law enforcement that's in a challenging community knows that you have to be engaged in neighborhood policing. You have to be engaged in crime prevention because you're just rolling the dice before something happens where you need to draw upon all of those deposits. And I say this next part with the utmost respect for the fire profession, firefighters. In police work, the nature of our job is making withdrawals from that emotional bank account with the community. It's natural. We make traffic stops, we detain people, we use force, and occasionally we have to use deadly force. Those are all withdrawals. Whether they're justified or not, they're withdrawals. Firefighters don't have to do those things. We do. And so knowing with 100% certainty that we're going to be making several withdrawals from the community today, the amount of deposits has to be consistent. And I won't get into this right now, but it has to occur regularly, frequently, and it has to be the priority. Otherwise, like I said earlier, you're just rolling the dice, because when something bad happens, you're going to go to that account. And if you're overdrawn, it's too late to make deposits then, because the gig's up. They know darn well why you're being nice, why you're going to all the community meetings. It's just like if you forgot your, wife's birthday, delivering the flowers the next day, it's too late. Yeah. She knows why you're doing it. It's the same with the community. You got to make those deposits when you don't need anything.
So true. Yeah. Thank you.
I've never done that, by the way. I've never had to I've never had to make that big of a withdrawal.
I'm glad you have that bank account.
It's there.
Thank you. Chief Gonzalez, can you talk about what role the community should play in guiding or influencing the delivery of police services in Riverside?
Sure. I'm trying to get over the traumatic event of thinking what would happen if I forgot my wife's birthday.
Don't do it.
The first thing Bob said, it's funny, we use a lot of the same terminology in law enforcement, but I use that exact terminology when we talk about withdrawals and deposit. But as far as the community being the voice, we do that. We've done this triad philosophy for years, where in order to have, solutions instead of problems at every meeting or gathering, three things need to be involved. It's us, the city leadership, and the community. And so we do put it in their court a lot of the times to say, hey, we're not here to talk about all the problems. What are some of the solutions that we can all work? We're on board. Your police department is, your city leadership is, and your community is. That's the only way we're going to get through a lot of these big issues. And for us, with my community in particular, in 1998, we were Minneapolis. We had a shooting called, and Bob probably remembers the Tyisha Miller shooting, which was nationwide and international news. It landed us in a consent decree. It's one of those Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton things in our city over and over. And it really rocked us as an agency. And we had only, to use the same terminology, have taken withdrawals, it seems like, in our city. We didn't have a lot of these relationships with the community that we needed to. And for us to try to go to an African-American clergy member and say, hey, we'd really like to meet with some of you guys now, it was just too little too late. So we've worked really hard since that time. And I was an officer at that time, quickly became a sergeant after that, and was really making sure that this department was going towards making those investments and those deposits into our community. And you won't find it, not a grassroots meeting, a clergy meeting, a school district meeting, a business chamber meeting, without us being represented there in some way, shape, or form. And it all builds up to this moment, 2020, to where it's like, okay, now we need to make a withdrawal. we need some help. And it's kind of funny. One of the BLM rallies we had, and one of the gals that is with them, who I am very fond of. We've had a long time relationship since the Tyisha Miller days. after they wanted me to speak at it, and afterward, she came up and hugged me and says, "Oh, you're my favorite chief," and blah, blah, blah. She goes, "I just can't say that out loud right now." And I kind of laughed about it, but I totally appreciated her honesty with that. I totally understood what she was saying. And, but I was able to go through a lot of these grassroots community, these groups that we've developed over the years. And, I do a presentation to council, and we've had definitely our fair share of large protests. And then some of them go sideways. And I have some of those groups that either are going to stand up for us and speak in favor for us, but at the very worst, just remain neutral. Not be the actual hater is what the goal is sometimes, depending on the situation. But
yeah, that's a really interesting history, Larry. Has a priority on community engagement since those earlier days during that crisis, has that continued on to help the community kind of sustain itself?
I would say even stronger now. My direction is going now is, which we really failed in this part, and I think we're getting better at, is I need to target the youth. We are a college town. We have Cal Baptist, we have UC Riverside, La Sierra University, we have junior colleges. It's 350,000 person city. I haven't really paid attention to that youth category as much as we should. So that's really kind of our goal this next year.
Yep. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sergeant Palladini, can you talk about the role that the community plays in guiding or influencing police services in Norfolk?
I can. I often think back about sort of the history of policing. Even, I'm kind of at the midpoint in my career. And if I look back to sort of my early days and what was being taught, and I know the chief sitting here with far more years of service than me would probably agree that policing has evolved and changed. And that's been a direct result of the ways in which the community has shown up and the ways that the community has responded, which has caused us to reflect on what isn't working. And we know what doesn't work is trying to arrest our way out of problems that are related to mental health and drug addiction. We here in Massachusetts, very similar to most other states over the last 7 or so years, have really been kind of in the crux of this opioid epidemic. And we're looking at sort of all of the ancillary crimes that are happening as a result of extreme addiction. And the mindset on the part of officers and sort of policing philosophy in general is, we have a job to do. We have to have that sense of authority and control and maintaining, what is right and just under the law. But with that is the balance of sort of this, I hate to call it a softer approach, but, many officers are looking at it that way, that we really kind of have this community caretaker approach where we are partnering with our local substance abuse coalitions. We are bringing clinicians on. We're in the process right now of bringing a clinician on staff so that we can have somebody who is readily available, able to supplement and support us on calls for service that we may not be fully equipped to handle. And so for the last several years, we've been running a crisis intervention team where we network and we partner with mental health professionals in the area to really mitigate incidents with residents, because every community is experiencing this. It's a small percentage of residents that are causing the greatest amount of calls for service. And we look at the trauma that somebody who's, suffering from a mental health type illness, every time the police come and respond, and, if it gets physical and force has to be used for the safety of the person and for others, we're looking at that and we're trying to break that down and see how can we go about this a better way. And I think that's really in 2020 and 2021, what our communities are calling for. They want us to have that support and that supplement, but the language that's being used is really divisive. And we're talking about defunding and things of that nature. And it gets emotional for people. But I think at the basis of that is really the things that we have been trying to do in law enforcement for the last 10 or so years, in really trying to provide support for our residents. So I think that, the community is really playing a role in this simply by showing up, and we're able to assess those needs, and we're able to kind of take a different approach than just this, kind of lock them up, authority and control. Things have drastically changed in law enforcement, and I'm very proud of that fact.
Michelle, one of the things I wanted to ask you is, you saw the research that we've done that talked about or showed that school safety and security is still the highest priority, both in 2018 and 2020. You've had such a long engagement around the school environment in your history, in your career. I'm wondering if you could just share a little bit about how schools and school environments play into the delivery of schools or of police services in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we look at school safety and security, we're constantly looking at threat assessments. We're constantly looking at structural security, ways that we can prevent crime through the environmental design. But the biggest piece we're missing is the relationship piece, the ability to prevent these things before they start. And if you sort of look at how good we are as a profession in terms of emergency management, we're looking at ways that we can mitigate incidents, we can prevent, we can respond, we can recover. That model can be applied to the relationships that we have with our community, because the second we're responding to an incident in a school, it's too late. That communication has been broken down. And it goes across the spectrum from relationships that the police have with children, the relationships that police have in the communities, relationships with educators. So the second you build up those relationships, you establish that trust, you establish that legitimacy, you're really able to break down some of those walls that exist that lend itself to a lack of safety in our school system, simply because you don't have those trustworthy relationships where you can sort of build this strong foundation. So it's so important.
Yeah, thank you. That was stated very just excellent. So thank you very much for that. Chief Gonzalez, can you talk about the strategies that you use in Riverside for managing community expectations?
Sure. First of all, just speaking specifically, obviously, which all I can do is speak for my city, is I didn't get hit real hard on the defunding stuff when it was first coming out. They picked and choose some of the national rhetoric that was going on what they wanted. So I didn't get hit really hard on defunding and demilitarization. The 8 can't wait, if you remember that thing that came out, and I addressed those. And the good thing is, and I think Bob was even talking about earlier, like Fresno, we're a big, busy city to where people realize that safety is still their main concern. So if you want to defund, they realize they don't want to take any tools away from us because they're concerned about safety. And one of the things that I've been trying to manage this year is because all we talked about last year, well, before COVID, I can tell you, if I had 20 meetings in a week, at all 20, we would talk about homelessness. Right. And then when COVID hit, we're talking about social injustice and things like and still livability issues last year. But all the while, and the other two folks on the panel will say the same thing. We still showed up to work every day. We still have a job to do. And I know a lot of people were working at home, but they're still going out there. Crime didn't stop. They didn't give us a break. They kept going. And then I look back on our stats in 2020, we have over 600 guns we took off the street. These are arrests. These aren't 5150 seizing a bunch of guns and domestic violence, taking arrests. These are straight up traffic stops and arrests. So along with that many guns comes more homicides, more officer involved shootings, more violent crime. And I'm trying to remind our community, listen, this is a priority for me. I understand livability issues are huge. So this is the managing part. I understand they're huge because you know why? When people go to their businesses to open up their day and they have an encampment, they can't walk in their business, they're going to call. They're going to call on what they see. Not a heavy crime being occurred there, but they're going to talk about these livability issues, which I totally understand. The things I also have to make them understand, this is the educational part, is, last night we chased 2 other gang members and they each had a gun on them. Or we had a car chase and this guy was wanted on parole for homicide. Those things that never make the paper, they don't make social media very often, but they are out there and they're in our city. So I'm trying to balance with hey, we still need to do good old fashioned police work, take people to jail, but also make sure that I understand it's a priority with the livability concerns. We are listening to you, we hear you. And at the end of all of this, and I'm only using Bob as an example because he's in California. I don't know what it's like for Michelle, but we can't book anybody in jail right now. We have no bail. And the last thing we could do as a chief is go in and say, hey, our hands are tied. We can't book. We're not going to use that. We can't say that to a group. We can't say there's nothing we can do. We're going to continue to arrest people and educate the folks to say, I mean, we did a social media post about a month ago. We arrested a guy for GTA 28 times in 1 month. And so I'm not blaming legislation. but I'm also want to make sure they understand that we're still doing our job as a police department and responding to calls and catching bad guys, putting them into jail, doing as much as we can without sounding defensive in any way. You know, and so the expectations, and I don't want to go too far on a tangent. I'm just saying that the way I try to manage it is make sure I have the constant dialogue, and through social media, use that vehicle to say, hey, here's what we're doing. That's just the world we live in now. And all the while, and all the sweeping reform we went through under consent decree in the early 2000s, because a lot of the things they're asking us, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. We've been doing it for 20 years. You should have civilian oversight. We've had a civilian oversight board for 20 years. It's like they just don't know. So trying to come off without sounding defensive is a priority for me. That's another part of as far as managing the dialogue and the information that's disseminated both ways. Sorry if I went off too much. I could vent on you in the morning. So.
Larry, I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think sometimes the community takes for granted that we're in the midst of a pandemic. We're in the midst of a really polar environment just generally. Yet law enforcement is dealing with just a multitude of different issues that are impacting public safety in the community in all different aspects. And so the challenge is balancing your ability to meet all of those expectations and managing them in a way that you can still be professional, represent, and be responsive to people's rights, people's needs, all of those kinds of things. I'm really glad that you brought that up. I think that's a very good perspective to share with people. So thank you.
Thank you.
Sergeant Palladini, can you talk about the strategies that you use in your community for managing expectations?
Yeah, I agree with Chief Gonzalez. It's very, very similar in that, I feel as though we have done a poor job over the years at being transparent with our community about the ways that we operate, the services we provide, what our priorities are. And again, this is largely cultural, and we can kind of look at the changes throughout law enforcement just in a short, 10 years or so, that we are working to become more transparent. But it's, this is the way we operated. There was a culture of, let's keep everything, tight to the vest, pun intended, no pun intended, however you want to look at that. But, we don't want to give away our operational secrets, or we don't want to involve the community in sort of co-creating public safety. And so we're looking at ways now that has really hurt us in the past. And, for me, showing up in my community and really being of service means really listening and listening non-judgmentally, because I think we have kind of this idea that we know what's best for public safety, but we don't also take into consideration ways in which our communities can really help create that with us. And the ways in which they do that is by having this sort of conversational, I'm in a coffee shop, and this is one of really how I get my best information from the community, is these really informal conversations where residents feel that barrier is kind of broken down. This isn't a formal meeting. This is maybe a small kind of coffee with a cop gathering that I have occasionally, and they bring their concerns forward, and they get to know me as a person too. And I think that's another area of growth for law enforcement, is that we have these specific and strategic community policing units, and we have our school resource officers, but we have done a poor job at helping to create. Every single officer should be a community policing officer. Every single officer should have the skill set to have a conversation with a community member, maybe hear what their concerns are, but also be able to showcase. And I agree with the chief. We've been doing this stuff for years. We've been, really out in front of a lot of these issues, but we've done a poor job at communicating that to our residents. And I'll have residents say to me, wow, I didn't know you had a crisis team. I didn't know you were partnered with our substance abuse coalition. Or we go on a call for service and you have a resident who's thrilled to receive this booklet of resources. And we sit and we take the time to explain to them how they can get help. And that really leaves a mark and makes an impact. And so that level of communication and listening is so critical right now.
Michelle, our research shows that 52% of people who live in a community have not had contact with the police department over the past 12 months. And so the perspectives that they bring to the table really rely upon what they hear, what their perceptions are, what their neighbors are telling them, but with no real true connection with the police departments. And so I really appreciate you talking about the importance of having every police officer being a community officer, because that'll then lend itself to having actually a deeper reach into the community and making those connections in in a more positive way, in a way that really helps people to appreciate the value that local government brings to their community. I know during the pandemic, people have really turned to their local government and law enforcement for helping them just make it through this past year. And so I think that those comments that you shared are really valid. And is your community do a lot of just really neighborhood-based work to help create those relationships?
We do. And I think we're very lucky that we have an administration that is forward thinking and really supports that. And we have a really good relationship with our town management, our town government, that really, we've had some really strong conversations over the last couple of years in particular. And even in the advent of COVID, you know, we've really had to kind of break down some barriers even more to really have these conversations, to be able to communicate. And, you know, we're still out there, like the chief was saying, we're still out there doing our job every day. You know, we didn't take any time off. We're not working from home. And now it's more important than ever that we continue to remain engaged and visible.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Chief Nevarez, can you talk about the strategies that you're using in Delano for managing community expectations?
Absolutely. So the things that Chief Gonzalez talked about, the challenges, the obstacles that keep us from doing the traditional way of solving crime just aren't open anymore. And we received a series of messages through our legislature, through realignment, that told us that California leaders didn't want us solving crime issues through arrest. And that message has been received by me loud and clear back when I was with Fresno and with Delano today. And so I'm not shy about sharing this at Kiwanis meetings, at various other meetings, our town hall meetings, and letting residents know that some things that we used to handle that way just aren't handled the best now through those methods. And so I tell them that because I think it's important for them to understand the importance of being involved and deciding who the representatives should be, because after all, this is the constituency. So that said, I don't do it in a judgmental fashion to cast blame. It is what it is. And organizationally, you'll see that in my organization, I don't believe in counting felonies and misdemeanor arrests like we used to do in the 80s, because that's not a good indicator anymore as to whether or not a problem is being solved. What I do look at is somebody that's able to go into a crime problem and come up with a preventative way, maybe partnering with a property manager or partnering with a landlord or partnering with somebody responsible for an entity to help that place to no longer create crime problems or calls for service. That's something that I recognize. People are given awards for doing that, and also helping the community to understand. And it's been my experience recently that the community likes that. They like being brought in to be a partner. Recently we had a problem with a Kmart, the building that's abandoned and turned into a homeless encampment. And bringing on a local property manager that was right over the fence, bringing over the new property owner of the structure itself, and then helping them to help themselves so that this problem stopped reoccurring. And I don't have a problem being blunt and honest with the community, because they need to know that. Because if they don't, then they're expecting something from the police department. Real quick example on some arsons that were happening, homeless related. And they think that arrest, because of the dumpster fire, in the trash can, that person is still in custody, and the truth is they're not. So I think I owe it to my residents to let them know that this is what we're dealing with today. Now, I'm not saying we're not going to solve it. We're still going to solve it. It just may not be through those traditional methods.
Yep. That ties directly into that national report that I shared with you earlier, where the increase in the priority relates to the connectedness that residents want to have with the police department to do neighborhood problem solving, and to have that closer connection. Right. So you're working kind of more in partnership at the neighborhood level. So it sounds like you're kind of validating the research that we did over the past year. I am kind
right.
of
And Matt, and to kind of go on with that, maybe I'm a 56-year-old person. I've been around a long time. I understand that just because I want to do policing the way that I know, maybe society's decided that that's no longer the way that they would like us to solve crime problems. And like I said earlier, we police with the permission of the community. And so if they'd like us to go in this other direction, we're taxpayer funded. Then we're going to do what our society says, what our state says, what our local municipality says, and we'll do it that way. That's just the way it works. So I'm glad that they feel that they're empowered, and I'm glad as a leader of the department to be able to impart this on my workforce so that they're not frustrated thinking they're doing the right thing when that may not be how we're doing things anymore. Remember the book Who Moved My Cheese?
Yeah.
That the cheese has been moved, and it's incumbent upon us to be flexible and then find another path to get to that cheese.
Yeah, and I think you're bringing up another cheese movement, and that ties into the requirement or the expectation that communities are going to be transparent and honest with the data. And so, and I think that's been an evolution over the course of time where people expect more and more that they're going to have information available to them and that departments are going to be transparent with the information that they have. I mean, would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your perspectives on that topic. Let's shift over to the final question. And Sergeant Palladini, I would love to start with you. What tools and methods are you using to understand resident perspectives in your community?
Well, first and foremost, it's communication. It comes down to communication because our communities are looking for answers. They're looking to solve problems, but sort of the fundamental assumption of problem solving is that there is sort of a linear method to solve the problems that are plaguing our communities. Unfortunately, this is a lot of our legislation now, and police reform is born from this idea that we can problem solve each and every issue that the public believes exists within policing and sort of compartmentalize it into a one-size-fits-all approach. And so when I have one-on-one conversations, when we have community gatherings where we have the residents talk with us and explain their concerns, a lot of times their concerns are based upon things that may not necessarily be an issue in our particular jurisdiction, but they want to know the what ifs and they want to know how we're going to solve problems that may or may not exist. But it provides, sort of a forum for us to have those conversations and to get deeper into the things that we as law enforcement can do as opposed to what we can't do. And I think that's really what people are looking for. They're looking to see what we can offer, how we can sort of, again, kind of co-create public safety with our residents. And I think that's the biggest part. It's really building that social capital and really looking at ways that we can partner with the community, that we can diversify our stakeholders, that we can be strategic about how we approach crime issues, how we approach community engagement, how we approach things like citizen rights and how we kind of look at that in light of what's kind of being offered in the news and on social media, because there's so much noise out there today. It's very challenging for us as a profession. We can't get into this back and forth pitch and fetch. It's challenging, and I feel like it's more harmful than it is helpful. So how do we have these dialogues during non-stressful times? And I know we talked about this briefly prior to starting this panel, but how do we sort of build these relationships during times that aren't stressful, when emotions aren't high, when nobody's in fight or flight, and really kind of design and build these relationships? And I think we do that through our community-based programs. Everything we offer in the community of Norfolk is with our citizens in mind, and really kind of taking issues that we're having and then providing a forum. So we do a lot of gatherings where if we're having a series of break-ins, we do a community gathering on safety, on home safety, in ways that people can, be more vigilant, ways that they can modify, their homes, things that they can look for. If we're having problems with drugs, we're having, community gathering and we're discussing those issues. And we really try and leverage technology today, because we know, you'll have a community forum and maybe a handful of people show up, or maybe you have the same people that show up to each one. So we use our, local cable access, and they come, they film it, they blast it out on YouTube, then it gets blasted onto social media. And it's, we really are trying to get with the times, I think, in our profession, and really, instead of being fearful of technology, we're really trying to use it. And it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks, but I think we're learning in law enforcement to be a little bit more daring and putting our faces out there. And that's what the community wants. They're dictating that, they're driving the bus on that. And it's slowly and surely getting better.
Michelle, you brought up the whole issue of noise, and I agree with you. The city manager hat in me says that police departments, when people are questioning the truth, police departments don't have the luxury of not being able to truly demonstrate your performance and your progress on strategic goals and how you're moving forward in delivery of police services. Does your community have any kind of performance metric program that can kind of guide and provide that transparent report to the community about how you're doing and kind of help you get through all that noise?
We don't have the qualitative data, but we have a lot of quantitative data. And these are the things that are shared when our chief is going to town meetings, and our chief is having meetings, or our command staff is having meetings with town managers and the select board. We are sharing stories. We're talking about ways that we got, this homeless family off the streets, and, our police association actually paid for, a first, last, and security for a family. It's these small things that you don't often hear on the news, but they're ways that we are providing a public service that's far more reaching than, just stopping somebody for speeding or ripping someone out of a car because they're unlicensed and arresting them. We're really providing a big service to our residents. And, I think there's a lot of humility in our profession that, we're not going to go on social media and gloat about all the wonderful things we do, but maybe the time is ripe to really start sharing that. And by sharing these stories, our town government is saying, wow, it's incredible. We had no idea that you were doing that. So there's a time to be humble, but there's also a time to really inform and tell our community what we're about and the integrity that we have and how we are reflective of public service through our actions.
Yeah, thank you. There's no greater truth than local government that are delivering public services never toot their own horns enough to really help people appreciate the value. I think the pandemic has really helped people appreciate the true value that local government provides in terms of public health and safety and security. But you're right. I think there needs to be that method to really increase the level of sharing with folks how you're doing as a department. So thank you so much for that. That was awesome.
Welcome.
Chief Nevarez, can you talk about the tools and methods that you're using to help understand resident expectations in your community?
Yes, Matt. Over the years, we've used various methods. We've done community surveys through the mail. We also did them through utility billing. And my experience has been that, as Michelle pointed out, you don't get a lot of feedback. You get the same people that submit those back. More recently in Delano, this is prior to the pandemic, we do a lot of block parties, or we used to do a lot of block parties, and we will start again, hopefully this summer. And so when you have hundreds of people show up, and it is hundreds, we hand out surveys, and then we collect them in the line where we're handing out the hot dogs and hamburgers. And people, I don't know if they feel obligated because they're eating food there, but the return rate is a lot better. And they take the time to fill them out. They're more narrative though. They're not quantitative, but it's a way for somebody to, and they're anonymous unless somebody wants to give you their name. And we collect the information in that manner. That's how we've done it in the past. But I certainly see the value of being able to find a way to do it quantitatively to where, we can see what that progress or lack of progress is over time. I just haven't found an instrument that gets, the kind of feedback that we want. But more generic, the town hall meetings where you have people show up and they voice their opinion and they tell you what their priorities are and what they expect. And you continue to be amazed that it's not the crime part one crime data, but it's more the quality of life issues that they have wanted us to work on for the last 30 years. And it held true in 1986, and it holds true in 2001. Yard cars, garbage cans left in alleys, chickens, barking dogs, loud noise. That's what people want us working on. And it baffles me, but you know, you get that at those community meetings where people raise their hand and tell you, hey, this is what we want you to work on.
Yeah, those face-to-face events, though, are great because you do get a great perspective about what's on people's minds, and especially at the neighborhood level, where you can get into those casual conversations where there's that higher trust. Right.
Yes.
Yeah, they're absolutely right. You'll hear about all the things that you would think would not be that critical, and not hear about the things that you think maybe should be more critical, right?
Yeah, and it's important. I like taking officers to those events also. And in the past, another thing we utilized, at least in Fresno, was breakout sessions, because I think Michelle referenced this. You have some of the same people, and then you have some of the same people that speak out, right? And they can tend to dominate a meeting. And so by doing the little breakout sessions with one officer at each table, it allows more people to be involved and give you their honest feedback. And I think that's also important for the officers to hear that firsthand, because you know, you can sit there as a chief of police and tell them, hey, these are the things that the community wants us to work on, but they just think that, you know, you're a misinformed chief. So it's nice for them to get that feedback directly from community members through breakout sessions.
Yeah, you know, I think you're absolutely right. Part of the benefit of bringing your officers into that, and I think this kind of ties back into Michelle's comment too, is it's really important for officers to hear about the broad spectrum of community concerns and not just always being hit hard on, you know, those difficult conversations or those difficult discussions, or in officers where they're spending their time on doing some arrests or some negative connections with the community. Having them have the benefit of those more positive and more realistic human level kind of interactions, I think, is a really valuable thing to share with your officers. So thanks. That's a great perspective. And that's actually a perspective that I'm sure departments are doing it a lot, but we haven't heard that specifically stated in any of our panels. So thanks for that. Really appreciate it. Chief Gonzalez, can you talk about the tools and methods that you're using in Riverside for helping to just assess and understand resident expectations?
Sure. Just like we were, well, Chief and Michelle were just saying a minute ago, we've tried in the past to do, to measure our performance, and we've done it through community surveys online. But it's kind of like, you know, we kind of joke sometimes there's always the same people that will turn in the survey, or the same ones that might be the same 5 that go to a council meeting and be the haters, you know, or like, it's like, how do we get a true representation of the community when you have a city this large, but there's 3 people that are not so happy with what we do? How do you measure that? So what we've tried to do recently is I've on our city website, on the department's website, I post a thing called the Chiefs Community Engagement type thing, and it's really for the whole city and all the different groups that I'm going to. Whether, you know, every week I'm somewhere, Human Relations Committee, Community Police Review Commission, all the different boards and commissions that we have, as well as grassroots groups, clergy groups, things like that. And I mean, it's a full-time job, usually 4 nights a week of going to those, but it's invaluable. It really is invaluable to get the feedback from them. And then I guess if I want to measure my performance or our performance that way, is I need to go back to them the next week, let them know that I was listening to them. I understood what they were asking for, and here's what we're doing now. And it can be as simple as, you know, traffic is becoming a concern again after the pandemic. You know, it's always a big thing. Oh, we've added a couple motor officers. I love to tell that group, guess what we've done? We've bolstered our traffic division, which won't make some other people happy because we're going to get tickets, but we're listening to you. You know, one of the big things in California, one of the assembly bills that was passed last year, it's now a law, is that we need to provide body-worn camera footage of any type of major incident, an officer-involved shooting, within 45 days if there's a Public Records Request Act. So most departments are trying to get out in front of that, and if we have an officer-involved shooting, we've had 5 this year so far, and I know we had 3 in like a week and a half period, which was too many. But it's crazy how one of them happened on a Friday. We spent Saturday and Sunday filming a video to put out on social media to tell our story before the city went crazy. Young African-American male, with a gun, pointed the gun at the police officer. And we want to make sure that that was shown because we were monitoring social media, and he was unarmed. He was 12, 5 or 6 cops surrounding him. Just a total false narrative. And it's like, it's crazy the world we live in, that we have to get that information out as quick as possible. And we understand that, and we will continue to do that. And I was at a social event, a couple of weeks ago, and it kind of surprised me. Some friends of ours, their son is 24 years old. I said, hey man, let me ask you a question. I go, if I did a press release on one of these officer-involved shootings, and I told you the suspect was armed with a gun and he pointed it at the police officer and he returned fire, what would you think about that? He goes, I probably wouldn't believe it unless I saw the body-worn camera. And that's the mentality. It was, I can't say I was shocked, but I was shocked. I was like, really? You're not going to listen to what we say? I got past it a long time ago that what we say in court doesn't always go like it was when I first started. The older guys said, whatever we said went. And now I kind of grew up in the era where, you're going to need some other evidence to support your statements. And now we're at the point now where, we're putting together short movies to put out, to get our story out to keep the city calm. So
that's very interesting and a little scary. That you kind of lost what is the truth, and being able to have those kind of conversations with any kind of appreciation or understanding. That's really something. Have you noticed just briefly that during the last year that engagement levels have increased in Riverside, or any perspective there?
I think they've increased. I think because I did have those relationships growing up in this community, it's made it easier for me to maintain them. Like when the last chief came in, he was here for 9 years. When he first got here from LAPD, he had to go somewhere every night to a different group to get to meet everybody. I'm sure Bob had to do that when he went to Delano. So you got to get to know who's who in the city. And where I didn't have to go through that, I was able to start concentrating more on new groups to dialogue with, because I've already established the ones with the other groups.
Yeah, another benefit of your long tenure in the community. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. Hey, this has been fantastic. Thank you all for your perspective that you've shared. I would love to just kind of open the floor up and see if there's any questions that you have between each other before wrapping this up. Any of you have any thoughts on your mind, or any follow-up comments?
I'll add a comment and maybe see if Bob or Michelle have anything to add. I will say this, and I say this to a lot of the community groups I meet with. I feel strongly we have a very supportive community. Mm-hmm. I feel lucky that I am supported by, 95+% of our community supports their police department. And I try to make sure, and like you said at the very beginning, maybe before we got on, we're kind of, maybe all three of us are similar in the fact that we have a positive outlook. I do. I try not to watch the news too much to maintain that positive outlook. But once I get into work and I start talking to groups and different meetings and stuff, you can think, we'll get through this. And in my position, I can't go moping around at the different stations and saying, oh man, this sucks. Hopefully nobody supports us, I want to make sure that they know that the majority of our community, high 90 percentile, supports us.
Yep. Bob, Michelle, any thoughts?
Yeah. Matt, I just want to tie into that very briefly. The trust building and all the noises that we're hearing out there. It's loud and it can be dominating. There's another benefit of the trust building that we do in the community that's intended to get the community to trust the police, right? The other benefit is that if our officers aren't interacting with people when things are going good, they tend to see the world through a very dark lens, a very depressing lens, a very scary lens. And that's amplified with what's going on right now that they're seeing on the news every night. And that's really dangerous, because when an officer starts seeing the world in that manner, it affects their mental health and it affects their relationships at home. One other area that I was really involved in, both Fresno and Delano, is helping officers be better prepared to handle the job with strong mental health. And by forcing those officers to do the things that they, a lot of cops don't want to do this, barbecue for the community, blow up balloons for the community, interact with kids at schools in the community. Those are all helping them to have a more healthy and a more accurate view of our community, because, as Larry points out, 94, 95%, I'd say maybe even higher, of the people in the community support them and want to interact with them. And they need to see it, because you can say it, but they need to see it. And by doing those trust building activities, you're also creating a more healthy cop. And that healthy cop's going to get less complaints, going to call in less, he's going to call in sick less, going to use force inappropriately less, and hopefully not overreact in a situation that's presented to the world. So that's another benefit of the trust building activities.
Yep, absolutely. Michelle, any final comments from you?
I will echo what both chiefs said. I think my two biggest concerns right now is officer wellness. Officers are in a tough place right now, I think mentally. And we need to really be focusing on that, and also highlighting that the community does support us, and also not going down that rabbit hole ourselves, those of us in leadership positions. And it's hard, we're human, we're all human, and we're all experiencing that range of emotions, but we have to remember that the community does support us. The other thing that really concerns me is the impact of everything that's gone on in the past 5 or 6 years, maybe since, Ferguson, is the impact on our kids and ways in which we are building relationships, because kids, their entire world is wrapped up in their devices. It's, TV, it's social media, it's the internet. And so how do we sort of combat any negative messaging and be able to share what is truth, and to really be able to engage with kids? I really think that's a strong area of focus for us moving forward.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up the kids aspect of this whole thing. And you're right, they are tied to their devices, and it's going to have long-term impacts for sure. This has been just outstanding. Thank you so much for sharing all of these perspectives. I love the way that all of your communities and under your leadership have kind of made engagement a priority, and you recognize the value of needing to build that engagement over time and during periods when it's calm. And it sounds like the majority of your focus has been on those personal connections, and you never can develop stronger engagement or connections without having those personal connections. And so this last year has been certainly a challenge. I love the fact that we've talked a little bit about transparency and accountability and the impact that has on people's willingness to accept and understand the role that law enforcement plays in their community. The use of community partners and the value that they bring. I appreciated hearing too the partnership within the organization and the community, the police department, the local government leadership, as well as the community, all having to kind of come together to make it work. But all of you have what sounds to be just excellent programs in place for helping to understand what people's perspectives are, and in communicating ways that manages them in a meaningful way. So thank you for that. I really appreciated your perspectives, and the final point about the value and the importance of paying attention to officer health. I think that probably communities don't do as good of a job in that aspect or that responsibility as we need to, because it impacts everybody, and officers are city residents as well, wherever they live. So that is great. So thank you very much. I want to just kind of wrap this up by, I'll follow up with each of you. I'll make sure you've got contact information for each of the panelists, and I'd love to just connect with you at some point in the near future to just get your feedback on the panels. We do these conversations every week, and I would welcome your thoughts on anybody that you think would enjoy participating in this kind of a conversation or would benefit from the conversation. Certainly would welcome any suggestions that you have. You should start seeing these highlight segments of your comments on LinkedIn probably within the week, and you'll see them phased in. And the whole intent is to share these perspectives. There's a lot of people who trust and respect your opinions, and so we certainly want you to share them with your own networks so that those folks can take advantage of that relationship or that benefit of your comments and perspectives. So every week I have the chance to meet 3 great people, And today was no exception. I really enjoyed the conversation today and really appreciated everything that you've had to share. You are definitely leaders in your profession for a reason. And congratulations on the work that you're doing, and best of luck with everything that you've got in front of you. I think your communities are in good shape with your leadership. And so thank you very much for joining today. Look forward to staying in connection.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you all. I appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Good
Nice
one.
meeting you.
Nice meeting you all.